Thanks for having me in. I appreciate your letting me chat with you right now. I've got some important things to tell you, and first let me introduce myself. My name is Tim Stephenson. I'm the owner of Affordable Church Auditing, and I'd like to talk to you right now about fraud, the prevalence of it, some of the basis for fraud, why it happens. I'd like to talk to you about the benefits that you would have by tightening your internal controls, your financial procedures. And I'd like to talk to you about what our company offers. I'll give you the basic brushstrokes so that you can do everything yourself. I think that you'll actually profit time-wise by hiring us to come in, and I think that you'll get tremendous benefit from it. My name's Tim Stephenson. Like I said, I've been doing number crunching since 1982. I've started out doing public health epidemiology, which is disease outbreak control using numbers and statistics. I've done programming, school teaching. I've been working in the accounting department of a Fortune 200 company for the last 17 years and looking for trends, looking for outliers, looking for odd situations. That's what I do. Recently, I've looked into church work and a church financial situations and discovered that churches have got a real problem. I mean, love you to death, and I'm certainly a active church member myself. But churches generally have a real problem with internal controls. These are the financial procedures that you have at your church governing how the money is collected, how it's counted, how it's deposited, how it's paid out, to who writes the checks, all of the things that deal with your money and church assets. The problem is that churches tend to trust people, and that's a good thing, I suppose. But guys, if anybody ought to know what's in the heart of man, it ought to be you and me who've read the book. We know that the heart is deceitful. We know that it's desperately wicked. We know that people are, God's working on us, and that's a great thing. But we fall victim to temptation. And so we should not be surprised when people pocket some money out of the collection plate. The prevalence of fraud at church, and I'm using fraud in somewhat the generic sense. Fraud really means when you lie to get something. Theft is when you just grab it. Embezzlement is when you're supposed to have it for a time, but you wind up putting it in your pocket and converting it to your own use. We'll just call them all fraud for the purposes of discussion. The prevalence is kind of an interesting thing. There was a study done where they called up 1,000 pastors and said, "Have you had fraud, embezzlement, or theft at your church in the last 5 years?" 13.3% said yes, they had. Now, remember that fraudsters and embezzlers, they try to keep quiet about their activities. They try to hide what they're doing. So these 13.3%, these are the folks that actually knew about it. And I'll bet you there was more that were being fleeced without realizing it. And they were also the ones that were brave enough to own up to it to the surveyors. This is embarrassing if the church is letting money walk out the door like that. And so maybe these guys were telling the truth, maybe they weren't. The researchers that did the work were firmly convinced that the number was way higher than 13.3%. How much higher? Double? Triple? Nobody knows. However, they do know, one does know, that it's at least 13.3% and probably a lot bigger than that. Other estimates I've heard suggest 25% of churches are going to be hit. Guys, that's like playing Russian roulette. Russian roulette is where you put a bullet in the cylinder of a revolver and spin the cylinder a couple of times, then fire into your temple. If you're lucky, you don't blow your brains out. If you had one bullet and 4 slots to put it in, that's one estimate. Up to, let's say, 1 bullet and 7 slots to put it in, I'm not going to play either one of those. I'm not at all interested in playing Russian roulette. I don't care how many cylinders there are. The risk is real. The amounts are astonishing. The median, okay, now median is not the same as average. averages are skewed by some really huge amount. The median is where half the numbers are below the number of the median and half the numbers are above the median. This median number, the losses for churches and nonprofits, is $82,000, according to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners in their most recent report. $82,000, that's the hit. Over the course of about 8 years, let's say, typical is 6 to 8 years, you've lost $82,000. That's a huge chunk of change. If you look at the estimates that are bandied about globally, they believe that churches are probably losing a couple of percent more to fraud than they spend on missions. Guys, that's heartbreaking. So the prevalence is huge. The size of the hit is huge, and especially for small churches. I mean, that's brutal. And then we'll talk in a little bit about the some of the other costs involved, but that's just the money that walked out the door. So it's a real problem. It's a real problem. So why do people steal money from the church? Why do people embezzle? There's this thing called there's a construct that was thought up in 1949. Dr. Cressy came up with what's called the fraud triangle. Fraud triangle says there's 3 pieces to every instance of fraud. The first is a financial pressure. Some individual has some unspeakable financial pressure. The pastor has a gambling addiction, let's say, or a woman on the side. The treasurer got him or herself way upside down in terms of credit card debt. The bookkeeper's husband just got a diagnosis of cancer and they don't have insurance. Somebody lost a job. So there's some huge financial pressure going on. The second part of this fraud triangle is opportunity. They see that there's a way that they can solve their problems by taking something that belongs to the church and nobody will ever know. Well, they usually do find out, but it looks like a good opportunity at that point. Now, people don't just wake up one morning and say, gosh, I think I'll be a thief. They rationalize it. Rationalization is the third of the third part of the fraud triangle. And this idea of the shoulder angel and the shoulder devil that are busy carrying on this conversation with you about why it's okay to do this particular act or not. You'll hear all sorts of reasons. Things like, I'm going to pay it back next month. I'm not really taking it, I'm just borrowing it. Or, I'm the pastor, I have tremendous amount of education here and years in doing this work, and I'm being paid less than a janitor at the school system, and they're not paying me enough. So by my using the credit card for personal expenses, all I'm doing is writing the books. All I'm doing is making things right. Or, I'm poor, the church is supposed to support the poor, and so we're just making it easier and faster. These they sound pretty silly right now, but people can talk themselves into all sorts of stuff. When we look at diets and the reasons why I think it's okay for me to break my diet today also, I understand about rationalization. The problem is that of course, we're going to address these things from the pulpit. You're going to try to call people towards sanctification and submitting to Christ and inviting the Holy Spirit to run their life. And so there's all sorts of that going on from the pulpit. But still, the trouble that an individual gets in financially, that's kind of his problem. That's something he's done that we do not have influence over. The dialogue between the shoulder devil and the shoulder angel, the voices in the individual's head where they're debating a particular course of action, we cannot influence that. That's inside their head. What we can do, though, is we can influence the opportunity that he sees. We can change the opportunity that he sees by tightening up the internal controls. If he sees the opportunity of a cash box sitting on somebody's desk, nobody watching, well, we can put the cash box inside the desk and lock the desk. We can put the cash in the safe. We can put it in a plastic plastic bag that's tamper evident, so everybody would know if he got into it. We can station somebody there watching him. There's a variety of things can be done, but we can actually influence the opportunity that's seen. So that's what we're all about. That's what my whole company is about, is trying to help you reduce these opportunities so that you reduce fraud. So let me tell you the benefits that you'll get from tightening your internal controls. The number one benefit is that you're going to stop the fraud from happening at all. Okay, so an individual who plans a theft, if we don't let him carry it out, he may still have something to talk to Christ about, I suppose. Well, I know that. But he doesn't have the actual event. He never actually committed the sin. So that particular hedge that you're building around the individual, or around your cash if you prefer, what you're actually doing is you're preventing fraud. That's your first benefit. The second benefit is that you are reducing temptation. Now, temptation, gosh, as church folks, we're supposed to keep people from temptation. The young man walking down the wrong street in the book of Proverbs. Son, don't walk down that street. We know who lives down at the end there. She's trouble. You're going to try to prevent temptation. If I'm sitting there, folks, at a church potluck, do not put a plate of donuts in front of me and turn your back. Be nice to me, please, because I know what's going to happen. I'm going to talk myself into it, and I'm going to inhale some of those things. So if you tighten your internal controls, you remove temptation. If you have two people counting the cash, there's a whole lot less temptation for Billy Bob to pocket some of the money than if he's doing the count by himself. So the second benefit that you're getting from tightening your internal controls is you are reducing temptation. If my dear wife were to get a cancer diagnosis, I lost my job, and I could not afford the medicines that she needed. If I was doing the count by myself, would I have the strength to leave that money there on the table? Would you? I think I would. I think you probably would too. But we don't know, because we have not been tempted that much. Do we want to be tempted that much? No, thank you. Don't put me in that situation. Protect me. Be kind to your brother. So what you're doing is you are reducing temptation. You're preventing the sin in the first place, preventing the theft. You're reducing temptation. The third thing you're going to get out of this, the third benefit, is you're going to protect reputations. You're protecting the reputation of every person that touches the money in your church, not to mention the ones that don't touch the money, because you know where it is at all times and people are watching it. You're protecting the reputations. Think about Pastor Bubba. When he takes up a collection, he puts the money from the church into his left pocket. His right pocket is where he keeps his own money. Now, let's say that somebody made the accusation that Pastor Bubba was using his money to buy tractor parts if he was using the church money instead of his own money to purchase tractor parts. What sort of a defense would he have? He'd have nothing to say. There's nothing he could say that would have any weight at all to sway public opinion or to convince the reporter to go home and not write the story. Pastor of my own church, he never gets within 30 feet of the money. He has somebody else collect it, somebody else count it, somebody else deposit it, and somebody else write the checks. He gets a check from the church as his salary once a month, and that's as close as he comes to the contributions. So he's protected. If somebody made an accusation against him, he could invite the reporter in, show her the policies, invite her to chat with all the individuals that handled the money, show her the videotapes, and she'd snap her little notebook shut and go home. No story here. So there's the protection of the reputations. The fourth benefit, and this is very, very critical. I'd like you to seriously think about this. You all have insurance on your vehicles. You have insurance on your home. You may even have a fire extinguisher or two. You hope you never need any of them. Okay, Why do you have them? Because you don't want to be in a rough situation, needing it and not having it. Okay, let's look at church fraud. Let's say that you discover fraud has occurred at your church. You discover that Betty the bookkeeper has been diverting funds away from the church and into her own pocket for the last 6 years. She's stolen $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. Nobody's quite sure. Do you really want Betty taken away in handcuffs? Are you going to report it to the police at all? If you don't, you're going to wind up putting the next church at risk when she goes to a different church and does the same thing she did for years. Let's say that you want her to repay it. Are you going to use her estimates? She's already shown herself to be a liar. So then you have to hire a certified fraud examiner, perhaps, or a forensic accountant to come in. Thousands of dollars for that, just to find out how badly you're hit. Let's say that you get her promise to repay and you come up with a number and she doesn't repay. If you don't repay her, you've got to be sure to report it to the IRS or you're in big trouble with the feds. Do you have the legal ability under the church constitution to offer her that loan without a congregational approval? Are you going to tell your congregation? What are you going to tell them? How are you going to tell them? Well, the word's going to get out. When Betty the bookkeeper leaves the church, she's probably going to take half the church with her because they're all related to her. Certainly the donations are going to go down. Does the church have reserves in place in the bank so that you can cover the decrease in donations? All of these are really sticky situations. And the embezzlement might be even greater than that. A pastor in a local church walked off with the building fund and took a bunch of blank checks to the trustees to sign and wrote them to himself for $167,000, according to the sheriff's department. That church is now in the hands of somebody else. It's shuttered. That church is no more. People have left the faith because of this. So all of those are really sticky situations. That's a big sticky situation that you don't want to be in. Here's how to prevent that. Here's how to deal with that sticky situation. Deal with it like I deal with gunfights. I'm very successful in dealing with gunfights. Part of this is because of my Navy SEAL training. Just kidding. I'll tell you the reason I'm successful at gunfights. I stay home. Let the bad guys have their gunfight on the other side of town in the middle of the night. I'm at home in bed. By the same token, if you have tightened internal controls, you won't have the fraud going on at your place. So you won't find Betty the bookkeeper guilty of getting into the church monies. You won't have to deal with her going out in cuffs. You won't have to deal with the press, with the police, with your congregation, your half congregation. So the fourth benefit is staying out of sticky situations and avoiding church splits. So those are your four. You're preventing the problem, you're reducing temptation, you're protecting the reputations of all the people in the church, for that matter, the reputation of Christ and Christ's church, your specific church. And the fourth is you're staying out of horrible, sticky situations. This is a very good thing to do. Okay, so how do you do it? You can hire a CPA firm to come in, send somebody to do it. You can hire, let's straighten this out from the get-go. A CPA can do a formal audit of your books. What they will do is make sure that the financial reports that you get are accurately reflecting the movement of money throughout your church. They will verify that you follow the generally accepted accounting principles, and they will certify it with a proper professional opinion, and that will cost you $8,000, $10,000, $12,000, $15,000. Some churches can do that. Some churches should do that. If you're going to be applying for loans, you're probably going to have to do that. There can be a review. That is a review of your books and your financial reports, depending on some of the things that you provide rather than they're going after it, looking at it themselves. There are compilation, that is even a less rigorous examination. But what I offer, what our company offers, is a review of your internal procedures, your internal controls, the financial procedures. I chatted with a CPA trying to find out what these costs might involve. And he said that the audit of the books really is probably not what most churches need. What they need is someone to look at their internal controls. This fellow offered to send somebody out, spend all day Saturday interviewing people, and then he'd go home and do put together a report and deliver it to you and charge you $1,000. What we're doing is we're offering a similar product based on a web questionnaire and a video conferencing for less than half of that. And I think it's a very good value. The prices are going to be on the order of, and we're, I want to encourage you to check the website just to make sure we're dealing with current prices. This may be out of date, but current prices are $450 for a web-based questionnaire survey given to up to 8 individuals. You get your treasurer, your bookkeeper, the elder that does the checks, the head usher, a deacon or two. You get 8 people involved, let's say. They all answer these the questions from the convenience of their home. When they're all done, I look at the display of the answers, and if everybody says the same thing, then I have my answer and we're done. If Bob says this and Fred says that, then we have to talk this through. So I make a note of that. We get together for a video conference and hash it out. We'll find out whether Bob just didn't get the memo or Fred knows something that everybody else doesn't know. And we'll put this together and I'll find out how things are actually done at your church. Once that's done, I'll write this report, and you'll have this goodly sized report with an executive summary, in case you don't have time to read the whole thing. A large section on all the things you're doing right, a section on all the things that could be improved, and 2 to-do lists. The first one will have everything in there prioritized, most important first. The second one will be the same list, only omitting anything that costs more than $5 or $10, so that you don't. So if you have a church that is somewhat tight with respect to money, you can choose to do all of the things that are free, where you put an extra individual in the counting room, for instance, or you get an extra pair of eyes here, or you change your procedures there. These are the things that don't cost a cent, but do a tremendous amount towards tightening the internal controls. So those are the things that we offer. Now, all of them are based on 2 principles, and I'm just going to tell you what they are. And you can put this all together yourself for not a cent. Actually, let me tell you a couple of, well, here are the 2 principles. First is, never let the fellow who can cover his tracks touch your money. So do not let the bookkeeper write the checks, or sign the checks, I should say. Do not let the bookkeeper sign the checks. Do not let the bookkeeper, a financial secretary, whatever you call this person, act as a cashier for the bake sale, and so on. The second main rule is get at least 2 pairs of eyes on everything going on with the money. Have at least 2 unrelated people take up the collection. 2 unrelated people count the collection. And 2 unrelated people involved in the writing of checks, where one person approves it, the other person signs the check, and so on. Everything I do is built on that. However, I've done a lot of thinking and done an awful lot of research and come up with 336 questions that work this out into the smallest of detail. And I think that you probably would benefit from hiring me, because it will save you a tremendous amount of time and you'll get the job done correctly. So there's a lot of different possibilities of ways to do this. You can buy all the books I did, talk to all the people I did, phone the district attorney and chat with him about how things are done. There's a lot of work that I've put into this. You can do all that yourself too, or you can hire me. I pray, though, that you would actually give some serious thought to tightening the internal controls at your church, drop by our website, affordablechurchauditing.com. Drop by our website and see what we can do for you. Wish you the best. May God protect you and your church. Thanks.